Hello there. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Meredith Newmark, and I am the Senior Director of Operations at Atlas Corps. And I'm excited to have you join us today. In this webinar, I'll be talking about the basics of the Atlas Corps Fellowship, an overview of our top 5 skill areas, and our application and selection process. I'm also going to be speaking with Shinjini Chowdhury, one of our alumni who specializes in communications and marketing, about her experience as a fellow and alum. And we're also going to have a question and answer session at the end. So feel free to ask your questions in the comments, and we'll come back to them. So let me share a little bit of our about our process. So you may be wondering, what is the Atlas Corps Fellowship? Atlas Corps engages leaders committed to social change in professional fellowships at organizations to learn best practices, build organizational capacity, and return home to create a network of global change makers. So fellows serve full-time at host organizations that are based in the US, addressing issues that complement their expertise. They increase their leadership skills through hands-on experience while developing invaluable connections and participating in leadership development activities. We are currently recruiting for our blended fellowships and our remote fellowships. In the blended fellowship model, the latest version that we're using this year and likely next year, fellows will serve with their host organizations virtually full-time for approximately 1 month from their home countries before continuing their service in the US for the remaining 11 months, for a total program duration of at least 12 months, possibly up to 18 if they extend. And then in the remote fellowship model, fellows will serve with their host organization remotely full-time from their home countries for a total of 12 months. Who should apply to the Atlas Corps Fellowship? So here I have some of our eligibility requirements and a little bit about what we're looking for in candidates. The fellowship is open to people worldwide who are not US citizens or residents. They have at least a bachelor's degree or equivalent, are highly proficient or fluent in English, and they are 35 years or younger at the start of the fellowship. Fellows must also be committed to living on a basic living stipend, and to cover and committed to addressing critical social issues in their home country or region. If you're in the blended fellowship, meaning you come to the US, that means that you also have to be committed to returning to your home country or region at the end of the program. And then one of our other requirements is that fellows must have at least 2 years of experience in at least one of our 5 main skill areas, which I have listed here. I'm going to come back to those and explain more about them in a minute. Next, you may be wondering, why should I apply to the Atlas Corps Fellowship? So here are some of the benefits that we'll be talking about today, and I also look forward to hearing from Shinjini a little bit later about her experience. Part of the idea is that you gain professional experience with US-based organizations and just experience in general, working with different cultures and working across language barriers, working across borders, and that helps you develop cross-cultural skills. You will engage in meaningful learning opportunities at your host organization and gain new perspectives on different professional topics and social issues around the world. You'll be connected to a network of 1,700 plus social change leaders from 116 countries. So you'll gain that that network and that source of support and inspiration, and people that you can go to as you're moving through your career. It's a great network for different resources throughout, not just throughout the fellowship, but throughout your time as an alum. You'll also gain access to supplemental trainings and networking opportunities. So every fellow is enrolled in our Global Leadership Lab to complement their host organization experience. And that includes a cultural orientation. It includes helping you plan your fellowship and your career goals, reflecting on the year. It also includes our leadership development series. So there's a lot of different trainings. I mean, and other trainings. We have other events going on basically every other week. It seems like at Atlas Corps. So there's always different activities and opportunities to tap into. You'll gain support with planning your post-fellowship career. So not only support through some of the activities we do through Global Leadership Lab, it could also include enrollment in different career networks that help you look for jobs after your fellowship, support with whatever your career next steps might be that will support you in that process. You gain financial support for basic living expenses. So obviously, one of the barriers to serving in the U.S. is obviously the cost of doing that, and ASCOR provides a basic living stipend to cover the basic living needs during that year, such as shared housing, groceries, local transportation, a phone plan, basic health insurance, things like that. And then for fellows who are in our blended fellowship, meaning they come to the US, we also support with the travel and visa process. So that includes covering your international flight, sponsoring your J-1 visa, helping you with the visa application process. So those are some of the benefits of being an Alice Corps fellow. And next, I wanted to come back to this top 5 skill areas that I mentioned earlier. This is a little bit where we're trying to refine and make it clearer to applicants what it is that we're looking for and what host organizations are looking for. And so these 5 skill sets are the ones that are the most in demand at our host organizations. So, looking at all of our placements for the past several years, these were the 5 skill sets that really stood out. And so, of course, our selection process has to focus on the candidates who are most likely to match with a role at a host organization. And so we're looking for candidates who possess at least 2 years of experience in one or more of these skills, who will have the greatest chance of being successfully matched for the fellowship. So this first one is communications and marketing, which our alum Shinjini is going to talk a little bit about, since that's her area of expertise. But in this area, fellows serve at mission-driven organizations by creating engaging content, managing social media, or developing marketing campaigns to increase visibility and engagement. Monitoring and evaluation and data analysis. If that's your area of expertise, you can expect to build frameworks, collect data, and provide analysis, recommendations, and training to drive program design decision making at your host organization. If you're in the operations and human resources field, fellows serve their organization by supporting and developing and improving operational frameworks, procedures, and processes in the areas of talent management, human resources, strategic planning, knowledge management, operations, supply chain logistics, lots of different topics there. For partnership building and business development, fellows will get hands-on experience in how to mobilize networks, manage partnerships, and develop business proposals to amplify impact at your host organization. And then finally, program and project management. Fellows will design, plan, and structure project-based work plans, coordinate and organize program activities, and engage partners to facilitate smooth project and program implementation. So, so those are our 5 skill sets, and these brief descriptions I'm giving, they're not meant to be necessarily a full picture or exactly what those fellows might do in any given role. These roles vary by what the host organization needs and what they need on their team. And so you could be doing some of those things. You could be doing all of those things. You could be doing a mix of things. So it really depends on the role. But that's just sort of a brief description of the kinds of roles that you can expect. And if you did actually make it to that stage where you were in the selection process, you could receive a position description that explains that more. And moreover, you can read more on our website about details on each of these skill sets so that you can consider whether your experience is a good match for these positions and what host organizations are looking for in candidates. So there's a lot more details about the kinds of skills that might be beneficial if you have them. And it's also, again, like I said, it's not an expectation that you would have necessarily all those skills, but just to give you an idea of what a competitive candidate might have some of those skills. And the most competitive candidates also demonstrate their experience in this skill area throughout their application. So you should select one of these areas as skill one on your application, and then you can select other skills as skill two or three. And there's more options for you to choose some beyond those five once you go to skill two and three. And just think about how to tie your existing experience to one of these five areas. For example, you might be looking at this list and you're like, oh, well, my experience is in event planning. So that uses project management skills. So while we don't want you to make up experiences or get too creative here about describing your past experience, do think about how you can best present yourself and best tie your experience to one of these five skill sets to put yourself in the best position to be considered by host organizations. All right, I know that was a lot of information, but I'd really love to hear from Shinjini. So I'm going to take this presentation off. And thanks very much for joining us, Shinjini. I'd love to take a closer look at the alumni experience within one of these skills, communications and marketing. And maybe we can start off. We have this tradition at Alcor of introducing yourself with the 5 facts. So Shinjini, could you share your 5 facts?
Yes, thank you so much, Meredith. Thank you for having me here. And it's always great to connect with the Atlas Core team through everything that you're doing, especially to connect with newer folks who are going to join the family. 5 facts, yes. So I'm from India. You know my name. That's fact one. Then I am from India. My host organization was SAP, so I worked with the global CSR team at SAP. Number 4, a social issue that I'm really passionate about is mental health and well-being, making it accessible to everyone. So well-being essentially across all socioeconomic strata, across everyone who needs it. And fun fact, so at present, I am the proud owner of 5 sets of colored pens which travel with me wherever I go, along with my journals.
Awesome. Very, very creative. Sounds like a good outlet. Well, fantastic. So take us back to a few years ago. What were you doing before the fellowship, and what made you decide to apply to Atlas Core?
Before the fellowship, I think I was a little lost, to be honest. I was in the social impact space because that was clearly what I was passionate about from quite a young age. But around that time, it also took me a while to realize that the social impact space has many functions and verticals. When you call yourself a social impact professional, that technically can mean a lot of things. There's so much there to do, right? So I tried out a bit of everything. So I was a documentation person, I was a trainer and a career counselor. I also did a bit of qualitative research. So it was a bucket of things till the point that I thought that all right, this is a lot, but I want something more. So there was this urge for a little more exposure, a little more learning. And I came across the Atlas Core opportunities somewhere, and I thought, all right, let's apply to this. And I think the first time that I got an email from SAP, from you, saying that SAP is a match and that they might want to, uh, you know, uh, interview me, was during the time that I was on a family vacation in Bhutan. And it was really amazing for me because it was the first time that everything that I had done was being pieced together in a role, in a social impact comms role.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing that context. So that once you got matched with your host organization and started the fellowship, what was your role?
I was a communication and marketing fellow with the global CSR team. So for all the CSR work that SAP does, so I had a co-fellow, Busang, and he and I were the two comms people who were working with the team. So we kind of split up the comms responsibilities, and we worked very closely with our supervisors, trying to put together communication strategies, trying to implement them. And it was a huge learning curve for me, honestly. But great mentors, great learning, so it turned out well.
Great. And tell us a little bit more, what types of communication and marketing activities did you complete during your service with your host organization?
the most fun and thing that I did, I think that was also my biggest learning curve, was to put together a communication strategy. Till then I was fairly young in the workspace, and till then I had my conception of communication was limited to the kind of pieces I was writing. And it
Mhm.
was the first time at SAP that my supervisor Jen, she actually literally sat me down and taught me how to create a communication strategy. Those memories are very very vivid, and I still go back to those learnings even now when I'm building a strategy. I go back to Jen's tips of ask the three questions of who, what, why,
Mhm.
and that really helped. So interesting activities were creating com strategies, and not just creating the strategies. How do you implement them? How do you create a plan
Mhm.
that works for a global team, because there are different time zones, different activities and projects that are going on. Yeah, that was really interesting.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like a really great hands-on learning experience. And what's one professional accomplishment that you're proud of from your fellowship?
uh, Definitely learning how to build a strategy. Yes, because before that I had zero clue how that was done. Right, it was the first, and the first strategy I built was for partnership with UNICEF. So that was a big learning experience for me in terms of how does a brand, how does an organization that does such impactful work actually think about their communications. How do we build a brand? What are the key messages that we actually want to talk about? And then there were these learnings which I still fall back on today around brand hygiene, around brand coherence. So,
Mhm.
which are now terms and concepts that come fluently to us comms folks, but at that point, those didn't, at least to me. So, and another professional something that I would call an achievement and growth would be working with diverse team members. They were from
Mhm.
across the world, different time zones, different ways of working. My co-fellow Busang and I started falling into a good rhythm of, complementing each other's work, which I
Mhm.
thought was really great.
Excellent. Yeah, that fellow support really makes a difference. Um, on the flip side of those high points, what were some of the challenges you faced during the fellowship, and how did you overcome them?
The pandemic started a month into our fellowship. So I was in the US in February. I was going to office, and then I suddenly see Busang buying masks and
Yeah.
using them, and he's telling me, Shinjini, the pandemic's coming, we have to be careful. And I was all optimistic and saying, no, 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 it's not going to come here, nothing's going to happen. But then we went into a lockdown, and March onwards, I think it was around 15th or 16th of March that everything went into a lockdown, and it turned into a remote fellowship for me, even though I was in the United States. So I was in a completely new country, completely new neighborhood. I didn't know much about a lot of things, right? And I was living out of a room with my fam. The people that I lived were really really nice to live with, so that was an upside. But essentially, it was a lot of navigation around living alone in a place that was completely new to me.
Yeah, yeah. You got some unfortunate timing with your fellowship, but kudos to you for surviving it. And honestly, it's for the fellows who came after you. It honestly kind of uh, changed, uh, the it changed the nature of the fellowship in a sense, in that a lot of fellows still spend a couple days a week remotely, and have that kind of hybrid um, work environment with their host organization, where it's some days in the office and some remote days. So yeah, it's changed a lot over the years. um, and how did you grow as a professional because of this fellowship experience?
It grounded me. Yeah, I like I said, before the fellowship, I was trying out a lot of different things and feeling a little lost along the way, because I wasn't quite sure what is it that clicked truly. and
Mhm.
and I believe that the fellowship grounded me as a communications professional.
Mhm.
It started feeling like, all right, this is a place where I belong, this function is a place where I belong, and I'd like to do more of this.
Mhm.
It's not just the skills that I gained, which I did, and that has contributed immensely. It's also a sense of direction around uh, the way forward.
Mm,
that helped.
yeah.
And it's always really positive to have supportive team members, which I did both from the Atlas Core side and the SAP side. uh,
Hmm.
all of that put together, I think it was a great journey. 1.5 years were amazing.
Excellent. And how has the fellowship enabled you to help your community either during or after your fellowship now as an alum?
As an alum, one of the things that I do make sure I do is, whenever there are potential applicants reaching out, it's always nice to talk to them and try to see how one can address their questions, because I remember I reached out to a lot of people when I was applying, and they
Mhm.
were really helpful. So I think it's just good to carry that baton forward, right? And as an alum, again, as a comp, I mean, the kind of skills that I built as a comms person, those are what have stood me in good stead while I work with my communities and the organizations I work with now, because we are still learning. There's so much of impact work going on in India, and there's so much of communication and storytelling that is needed around that. So when you know that you can contribute something to that, when you can build positive narratives and tell your stories boldly, I'd like to think that that might make a difference somewhere.
Excellent, excellent. And could you briefly share with us a little bit about what your role is now in your current
Sure.
organization?
Yes, sure. I work with an organization called Mantra for Change. So we work for education leadership
Mhm,
across 5 states in India. And by
mhm,
education leadership, I mean that we don't always directly work with students. So once in a while, we perhaps do, but
mhm,
our work is focused more around the leaders who impact the education system. So the government officials, the school leaders, teachers, parents. So you know how the proverb goes, right, that it takes a village to raise a child.
mhm,
That's what we believe in, that if you want excellent learning experiences for all students across the country everywhere, you need to build an army and a movement to do that. And that is what this organization does. We work with collectives, and we have so many partners across the place. Right now, I lead communications for the organization, and we are a team of 3,
mhm.
and it's pretty fun. It's a great ride. It's quite interesting.
Amazing. Well, I love that you're carrying that experience forward in helping your community now, even after the fellowship. Um, I want to also talk a little bit about the selection process. So once candidates pass the Atlas Core review and interview process, they can be considered by potential host organizations for specific roles. And if a host organization is interested in your profile, you go through the selection process with that organization. Can you tell us about your experience interviewing with your host organization? What was involved, and how is a candidate who is selected for a host interview prepare?
Yes, definitely. I would like to tell applicants that sometimes the matching process takes a bit of time. So for me, it did take a bit of time. I heard that I was matched with SAP after a while, a little later, after I had applied. But for me, the selection process uh, was quite interesting. I had 2 conversations with Jen, who was my supervisor, and Alex, who is head of the CSR team. So there was one conversation, and a second conversation, basically 2 chats. And in those conversations, if I remember correctly, Jen and Alex tried to gauge my interests, my fit as a person with the team. So I think they were looking for certain attributes from a future fellow. And there were some questions around that, the way I work, work culture, and attitudes, approaches to problems, things like that. And there was also some conversation around the work that I'd done previously. I'd shared some writing samples. So that was my selection process. But I can also tell you a little about the selection process as it went the following year, because in the following year I was part of the panel that was conducting the interviews for the fellows who would for the next class of fellows. uh, so I had the privilege of being both interviewed and being on the side which was interviewing. It's confusing words, but
Yeah.
yes. So for the second time, the interview process was more intense. There were, I think, 3 or 4 rounds of conversations, and there was also skill assessment that was sent out. which we reviewed and shortlisted candidates based on. So what essentially is the takeaway is that the the interviews that fellows have with host organizations is just what you would have with a job in case of a job, right? It varies from host to host. It varies from organization to organization. It depends on how the organization feels is the best way to select a fellow. But two or three things that remain standard would be conversations and skill assessments. The way you best prepare for that is do go through the host organization's website really thoroughly, get to know their work, see where, how, and if at all you connect to their work. And when you do your assignments, make sure that that connection is visible in what you're presenting to them, because they'll really want to see whether you're a good fit for them for the next 1.5 years.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. So it's not just about finding a good fit with the team. It's also about making sure that you have the skills that they would need for that role, and so that it can be a good learning opportunity and mutual exchange of the fellow contributing to the host, and
Right.
the host also helping the fellow develop in their career.
Right. Yes.
Exactly. Well, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for sharing your experience, Shinjini. Sorry about that. Let me share a little bit more about the application process, and then next we'll take questions from the audience. So if you do have any questions for either me or Shinjini, please do feel free to put them in the chat of wherever you're watching this, and we'll come back to them later. But for now, let me share a little bit about the application process. So you can apply for the fellowship by visiting apply.atlascore.org. This is a multi-step process, and the first step is to fill out an application. And the application, it's going to go through a little bit of your work history, describing your experience and your skill set, and there's a short essay question. It's also going to require a copy of your undergraduate transcript or diploma, or some kind of documentation of your bachelor's degree, and contact information for 2 references. Attaching your resume or CV is also encouraged, and you may be asked to submit samples of your work to provide evidence of your professional skills. You'll also be asked to fill out a skills section, where this is where I mentioned earlier, you can choose, you should choose one of our 5 priority skills, in which you have at least 2 years experience as skill 1. And then you can add supplementary skills and go outside of that 5 skill set in the skill 2 or 3. You can choose up to 3 skills to talk about on your application. And again, more of this information is online, and also even once you go into the application itself, there's information there. Our priority deadline is July 30th, 2023, to be considered for fellowships beginning in 2024. Because this is a really a multi-step process. You should apply by July 30th to give yourself the best chance of being considered for those 2024 fellowships. And we do accept applications year-round, but that I really encourage you to don't wait, start now, submit as soon as you can, so you can get yourself into the selection process. So once you've applied, we review your application, and top candidates move on to later steps. So first step is the selection board interview stage, where you'd interview with a member of our selection board, as well as be asked to complete an online assessment as part of a research collaboration between AtlasCore and the University of Zurich. If you pass the AtlasCore interview, then you can be designated as a semifinalist. Becoming a semifinalist does not guarantee placement, but it instead means that your application is eligible to be considered by our host organizations for placement. So organizations tell us what role that a fellow could fill on their team. We share matching semifinalist profiles with them, and then they select a couple candidates to interview. And if a host organization interviews you and selects you, then we would work with you on the next steps to becoming a fellow. If you're not selected by a host organization, then you can be considered for the next fellowship start date in a few months as long as you stay eligible. And we typically have 4 fellowship start dates each year. It can take several cycles for semifinalists to be matched with host organizations, and it is a very competitive process with about 50 fellows being selected each year out of hundreds of semifinalists and thousands of applicants. So, like I said, priority deadline to be considered is July 30th. So we encourage you to apply by then to have the best chance of being considered for our 2024 placements. So let's move to our Q&A section. And I see we have some of the questions coming in. So thanks so much for sharing these questions. So I see a couple questions about our age requirement of age 35. So yes, we do have a requirement that you have to be age 35 or younger before this, during when you start the fellowship. And part of the reason for this is because that is the experience range that we find is going to work best with this program, where the fellowship is going to have enough experience to contribute to the host organization, but not so much experience that they find it boring, or that it's going to be, we don't want anyone to come here and waste a year of their life in the US hoping to learn new skills and then actually find that the position is too basic for them. So that's part of the reason why we have structured it. We just our program, both the structure of the program, the training opportunities we provide, the training that the host provides, the benefits that we provide are all targeted towards more of a 22 to 35 age range. That's what we found works best for this program. That being said, if you are over 35, tell your colleagues, spread the word among your network, encourage them to apply, but also keep an eye out for our Virtual Leadership Institute opportunities, which sometimes have more flexibility in the eligibility requirements, because it's a different structure of a program. And so we're not currently recruiting for Virtual Leadership and Institute initiatives, but keep an eye on our social media, and we will post the next time that we are recruiting. So keep an eye out for that. Let's see. One other question that we receive a lot is, where will I live during the in-person part of the fellowship? So great question. So what Atlas Core does is supports the fellow in finding that housing. And while housing is ultimately the responsibility of the fellow, because the fellow knows best what they're, what's important to them in housing and what qualities they're looking for in housing, we do support that process of searching for housing with resources and with individual coaching on through that process. So generally we provide resources such as, here's the sites where you should look for, here's what you should look for in housing, and here's how to go about that search. Here's some different groups you can join, how and what kind of message you should send to potential landlords or potential roommates, and helping people through that process. And typically we have a fantastic staff that supports fellows through that process. And we'll usually provide some individual coaching. Okay, let's sit down and look at your housing options together to help them through that process. So, well, ultimately, the fellow has to put some work in and, potentially contact landlords and contact potential roommates and do some of that searching because they know what they're looking for. We do provide that support. I don't know, Shinjini, I don't know if you'd be able to talk a little bit about how you found your housing.
Yes, I second what you said.
Mhm.
So a lot of times help does come in from the underscore team, which is what happened for me as well.
Mhm.
And I think you'd given us a few groups. I mean, told us about a few Facebook groups and
Mhm.
a couple of other places online which are reliable and where we could look for housing. And I also remember that when I found a house, they were a family living in the house, and they were really sweet. So, and they weren't really doing it very commercially. So they didn't have a proper rental agreement or anything in place. I had sent it to you, Meredith, and you told me, "Oh my God, they don't have a rental agreement. This doesn't look safe." And then
Mhm.
I went back to them and said, "I need a rental agreement," because I was scared. I didn't want to be duped. I had
Mhm.
no idea what was going on, and they
Mhm.
gave me that agreement eventually. And I remember your email saying, "Oh, now I'm relieved, you have a rental agreement." so
Excellent.
so there's a lot of support from the fellowship team that kind of goes on there to help you not only look for houses, but also to uh, understand what are the things that you should look for in a house or in an owner, or even the terms of an agreement.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Glad that was helpful. Yes, I do encourage all of our fellows should have some kind of written agreement with their landlord, even if it's very, very basic, because I don't want anyone to be in a bad situation. Um, all right. Well, let's see. Another question that we get asked a lot is, do I get to choose my host organization? And can I suggest a host organization? So applicants apply not to a specific host organization, but rather the opportunity to be placed at one of our partner organizations. So matching semifinalists with host organizations is a multi-step process. So once we receive a position description from a host organization, then we send them the profiles of several candidates that could be a good match. And then they pick who they want to interview, and they may assign tasks, just like Shinjini described, where maybe a writing sample or some kind of assessment. And then they pick a candidate for the fellowship from that. Or they choose not to host a fellow at that time. That happens as well. So applicants can indicate in their application or their interview which organizations most interest them, or what kind of organization you feel like would be most beneficial to your career. That's the best way to kind of indicate your preferences, is to fill out your application in a way that kind of demonstrates what kind of organization would be a good fit for you. However, we cannot guarantee placement at any particular organization. And in many cases, those organizations may be looking for a very specific candidate profile. So you may look on our website, and you can see basically all of our past and present host organizations on our website. You may look at one and say, oh, I want to serve there, and like, don't get your heart set on it, because you don't know if that organization currently has a role available. If they may be looking for someone who can do project management, and you're more of a operations and human resources person, whatever the case may be. So that's kind of why I say, don't get your heart set on a particular organization. We also say candidates should not contact potential or current host organizations unless they have been contacted by a host organization first. And because that could jeopardize your candidacy if you sort of just reach out to host organizations on your own, because Atlas Corps is best equipped to discuss the logistics of hosting you as a fellow. But if you do have suggestions or preferences you want to mention, you can email us, or really any questions you have, you can email us at apply@atlascorps.org. All right, let's see. What other questions do we have? So, great question from Nora. What is the long-term vision that Atlas Corps has for the alumni networks in giving back to the community that they came from after their experience with this fellowship? Great question. So our vision is that fellows are returning to their home countries or regions to continue working on social issues in their communities. The goal of ASCOR is not to create brain drain and just have all the best minds of around the world come and just stay in the U.S. The idea is that it's very important for fellows to be leaving the U.S. at the end of the fellowship, to return to their communities, and even if that community may change, the important thing is that it's that you that alumni are contributing to a community, and not just stay in the U.S. So that's they use their experience there. And our vision is a talent journey where, in some cases, fellows may even continue to have a relationship with their organization after the fellowship. There's no guarantee of that. But there have been numerous cases where fellows either continue to work with their fellow, hire them overseas. So host organizations can do that. They can hire their fellow outside the U.S. After the fellowship, or even if it's a freelancer, contractor role, or some other kind of relationship where the host is still just engaged on a professional level, even if it's not a employment relationship. And that also fellows are engaging with other fellows and continuing to engage with Atlas Corps. Right now we are proud that we are engaged with two organizations that are led by our alumni in Pakistan, and they're collaborating with us on a big project building community resilience in Pakistan. And it's sort of a tripartite agreement with these two organizations in Pakistan led by our alumni, and then Atlas Corps offering virtual leadership institute to about 50 Pakistanis. So so we're collaborating with our alumni in this program. Those are just a couple of the ways that we engage alumni. Also, part of it is the network, so that we have our alumni through our network on either our different social networks or a listserv, where they're asking questions. How can I find this resource? Or does anyone have any tips? Or uh, or sharing a resource. Hey, we're hiring, whatever. Definitely when fellows travel around the world. Oh, I'm going to be in India. Like, can I meet up with any alumni there? So those are some of the ways that alumni stay engaged and continue giving back to their community. Shinjini, as an alum yourself, do you have anything you'd like to add on to that question, or we can keep going if you don't?
No, I would echo what you said, that a big part of giving back, and probably the main part of that, is returning to your country and start continuing to use the skills that you've picked up in your fellowship
Mhm.
in the current job. I mean, in the job that you have or in the enterprise that you set up. So it's a lot about skill exchange and sharing, and how you use those skills later on.
Excellent, excellent. Um, let's keep going through any of the questions that we either are frequently asked from us, or um, uh, questions that you may have. So keep adding your questions to the chat. One question about the fellow experience outside of the host organization. So Shinjini, I know, like as we talked about, your experience outside of the host organization was probably limited and probably deeply affected by the pandemic. It was maybe a little bit uh, not as much time out in the world as some of the other fellows who came before or after you. But I don't know if you'd be able to share a little bit about what kinds of stuff did you do outside of the host organization while you were in the US?
The leadership, the immersion labs that we did with Atlas Core is definitely something to be mentioned, because I remember that those labs not only had skill building sessions, but there were some really interesting talks that were conducted from sector leaders, from people who've been part of the Atlas Core family in different capacities. And the other thing that was really close to my heart was a community space that we had. We met once, and this was, of course, everything was virtual at that point of time, and we were all scattered in different cities. But there was this one community space that we kind of met over Google Hangout once a week, and that was our safe space. So you could call it a mental health sharing group, or you could just call it a community space, where we had our guidelines about how to make the space safe and non-judgmental. It was usually facilitated by one or two of us, and that was where we shared what was going on with work, with life, what was troubling us, what was encouraging us. And this was not a space to criticize the work that we are doing or the people that we are working with, but it was actually a space to go through, say, mental health resources. So we explored resources by people like, say, Brene Brown, or TED talks by different people on topics like depression to productivity to how the pandemic is causing so much grief in all of us, and how do you process grief, things like that. And that is the kind of community feeling that I feel the fellowship had given me and a lot of us.
Beautiful. Yeah, I remember those days where you and other fellows were doing those community conversations, and that source of support during what was a difficult time for everyone was just really inspiring to see. And I'm glad that you guys were able to support each other during that difficult time.
Yeah.
Let's see, what other questions do we have? All maybe we could talk a little bit about the uh, logistics of the fellowship. What the budget is like, which I know is in some ways one of the challenges of being a fellow. So the this is one of the questions we get a lot is what's a stipend like, and how do you determine it? So our stipend is meant to cover groceries, shared housing, like Shinjini was saying, she lived with uh, a family that had a room available. Um, it's meant to cover local transportation, and we also cover a phone plan during the fellowship, and the health and basic health insurance. So it is similar to other like volunteer programs. For anyone who's familiar with either Peace Corps or in America we have AmeriCorps, it is meant to be a service program. It is not a salary. It's meant to cover basic living needs. And so it's not going to be necessarily enough for going out a lot. It's not necessarily going to be enough for sending money back home or living in your own apartment, and may not necessarily be enough for uh, emergencies. It's meant to cover the basic needs. So it is meant to be manageable if you budget carefully, and we provide some resources on how to live on a limited budget during the fellowship. But it is not necessarily going to be a salary. So that's a little bit about what that stipend is like. Shinjini, I don't know if you have any advice for future fellows about what it's like living on the fellowship budget, or how you managed it.
I'd say prioritize. So if you're going in for a fellowship and you know that it's a fellowship, so it's a stipend and not a salary, uh, maybe it's time to go into it with a conscious decision that this 1 or 1.5 years I'm going to prioritize on learning and the work that I do, and if needed cut down a bit on other things which are not completely necessary, like eating out eating out a lot, or things that I would love as luxuries. Which so what I'm trying to say is that just go in it with into it with a conscious decision, and uh, understanding that it is a stipend and not a salary, and be really careful about how you budget from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. It's about having the right expectations, and sort of understanding what that stipend is about. I completely agree. We received a question from Sahib. It was mentioned that after getting selected, there should be an opening in the organization in order to start your fellowship. What if there isn't an opening or opportunity in the organization? What happens then? So to clarify a little bit, it's those things happen in the reverse order. So there's an opening at an organization, and they're reviewing candidates, and then they select someone um, for that fellowship. And so basically, you only get selected for the fellowship if there's a role at a host organization that they select you for. So it's not a case where I know there are some other programs like this where they essentially select the top candidates and then just match people. Ascore is not like that. We really want to make sure that because it is a year-long fellowship, you really got to make sure that there is a very strong match. And so that's what we aim for, is having a good match where it's going to be a great learning environment for the fellow, and that the fellow is going to be able to contribute to the host organization. For context, the host organization pays a fee to host the fellow. So they really want to make sure that it's going to be someone who is going to add and contribute to their team. Well, of course, fellows also want it to be um, uh, um, beneficial to their career. So essentially, you would only get accepted to the fellowship and only go through that process of, applying for a visa and all of that. You'd only do that if they'd offered you a placement. That being said, there's this question of sort of like, well, what happens if there's not a host placement for me? And we get this question a lot from people who make it to the semifinalist stage because they've gone through, the selection board interview. They've probably it's probably been several months since they applied, and they're wondering, oh, I didn't get matched to a host organization, and maybe that happens 2 or 3 times, and so sometimes semifinalists are wondering, you know. What happens if I don't get matched to a host organization? So like we said, being a semifinalist doesn't guarantee you get matched with a host organization. It's just the opportunity to be considered. And so there are, so you can still be considered for the next cycle. We keep our semifinalists. We basically, if you're a great candidate, if we determine that you're a great candidate once, you could be a great candidate again. So we do keep those semifinalists in our pool to be considered, as long as you're keeping your application updated, as long as you are still eligible, as long as you indicate that you're available and interested in the next cycle. People can be considered for multiple cycles. So there is that opportunity. That being said, some semifinalists never get matched to the host organization. So it is very competitive. Shinjini, I don't know if you can remember how long it was between when you applied and when you got selected.
About a little more than a year, I think.
Yeah.
So it was a wait for me.
Yeah, and so that is not that unusual. And for some fellows, it's shorter. They apply and they might get selected for the next start date. So you could apply in the next couple of months, and potentially you could get selected for January or our January fellowship. For some fellows, it takes longer. So it can really be a range. It depends on having a great match. So that's a little bit of context for our selection process. So we got, and this will be probably either our last or close to last question. We got a question from Hinstein. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. What happens if the fellow is recruited by the host organization based on their performance and level of impact during the fellowship period? I'm not sure if I'm understanding that question. I'm wondering. So I will answer what I think this question might be. Or I guess maybe just to clarify, host organization, again, you don't get accepted to the fellowship and then get recruited by a host organization. The selection process is the match with the host organization. So there would be a case where another host, or I'm not sure if maybe Hinstein meant like getting recruited by another host organization while they're serving with a different host organization. That also would not happen. A fellow only gets matched with one organization that they serve out for the duration of their fellowship, and you don't get matched to different host organizations during the program. You may be talking about if the host organization wants to recruit them to work full time. So one of the requirements of the fellowship is that fellows do return home, or at least you leave the U.S. at the end of the fellowship. And so there's not going to be a case where they hire you in the U.S. directly after the fellowship. They can hire you overseas. The formal requirement is that the host organization cannot hire their fellow in the U.S. 36 months from the start of the fellowship. So essentially, if it's a year-long fellowship, that would be at least for 2 years after you complete the fellowship. So again, like I said, we've had numerous host organizations that have hired their fellow overseas, or a host organization can also hire their fellow later after that time period has passed. But because of the requirements of the State Department and the requirements of the Department of Labor, ASCOR is not a work program. It's not an immigration program. It is meant to be a training program. So we do have those requirements in place so that it's not, a pipeline into a job in the U.S. immediately after the fellowship. If that makes sense. So I hope I answered that question. But feel free to write us at ASCOR.org if I didn't. And then I'll take one last question, then we'll wrap it up. Is it possible to be matched by more than one organization? Um, so you could be interviewed by more than one host organization, and in extremely rare cases, we have had cases where more than one host organization selected a candidate. Um, uh, if that were a case where two host organizations were like, we both want Shinjini, then we would offer the opportunity to choose between them. Usually one host organization moves faster than the other. So if it's a case where one organization is moving faster, then we would go with that offer. But there is not necessarily a possibility of getting matched with multiple organizations in order to serve at multiple organizations. And typically, again, because there's way fewer host organization opportunities than there are candidates, usually it's not a case where someone is getting multiple different fellowship offers. Typically, a candidate would get, if they are offered something, they would get one offer and then choose from that. All right. Well, thank you so much for those questions. Those were great questions. And if I didn't answer your question, check out our website, especially the frequently asked questions section. Or you can, and if your question is not mentioned there, you can also email us at apply@ascor.org. So this is the first of two webinars that will be done throughout June and July. Our next webinar will focus on tips for a successful application. It'll take place on July 5th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. To learn more, apply, get notified of our future webinars, check our website at apply.atlascore.org and click start your application. You can register your application account, and then once you're in the system, you can get our updates. If your question isn't answered there, again, like I said, check the frequently asked question page or email us at apply@atlascore.org. You can also watch our previous webinars on the AtlasCore YouTube channel. Thank you so much to Shinjini for sharing your experience and telling us a little bit about what it's like to be a fellow. And thank you to all of you for tuning in and for asking your questions. We look forward to receiving some great applications. So thanks so much, and we'll see your application soon. All right, thank you.